So Jess is the Bluegrass Region Nature Preserve Manager for the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves. Her work focuses on managing rare plant communities in this region, including invasive species management to protect and restore these communities. Previously, she has managed natural areas at the Morris Arboretum in southeastern Pennsylvania and worked as a horticulturalist in public and private gardens in New York City. She holds a bachelor's in art and art history from New York University and a master's in environmental studies with a concentration in resource management from the University of Pennsylvania. Jess, we are so happy to have you joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say I really enjoyed that last presentation, and it actually gave me a little bit of PTSD from all of my experience with lesser celandine in the Philadelphia area. I'm glad that we don't really have a problem with that yet on state nature preserves that I manage. And again, my name is Jess Slade, and today I'm going to be talking about another emerging invasive species that we all need to be looking out for in the state of Kentucky, and this one is called mile a minute. But first, I want to give a quick introduction to the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, where I work, for those who might not be familiar. We are a small agency within the Energy and Environment Cabinet that works to protect Kentucky's natural heritage. This includes stewardship, preservation, rare plant monitoring, and conservation. We also administer the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund, which helps fund the purchase and management of natural areas across the state. Altogether, over 128,000 acres of land across the state have been conserved through the work that we do and the help of our partners. And you can see some of those areas on this map here. We also manage rare species data and provide a clearinghouse of information on the environment, plants, and animals in Kentucky. This data is accessible through the Kentucky Biological Assessment Tool, or KY-BAT, which is an online tool that can be used to assist with conservation planning projects. And in my role at OKNP, I oversee the management of 15 state nature preserves in the Bluegrass region of the state. That includes open land management, prescribed fire, and a lot of invasive species management. Today, I'll be introducing you to mile a minute. The Latin name is Persicaria perfoliata. This has not become as established, thankfully, to our knowledge, as the previous species that we've discussed today, but we really need to start looking out for it. It is another common name for it is Asian tear thumb. You'll see why here in a minute. And it is not to be confused with Mycania micrantha, which is another invasive vine that grows in Florida and goes by the same common name. This species is an annual herbaceous vine in the buckwheat family. So some relatives that you might be familiar with include the smartweeds, Japanese knotweed, buckwheat vine, and docks. Even though the species is annual, meaning that it will finish its life cycle in one season and then die to the ground and not come back the next year except from by seed, it earns its name by growing very quickly. It can grow up to 25 feet long in one season. And as it does that, it forms dense mats that shade out other plants and prevent them from photosynthesizing. Its seeds can remain viable in the seed bank for at least 6 years. So that means once the plant has become established on a site, follow-up management will be necessary for years to come, or at least until the seed bank has been depleted. It could potentially have a really harmful impact to natural areas in Kentucky. Right now, it's just on our watch list for the Kentucky Invasive Plant Council because it wasn't documented in the state until recently, but is a major problem in other states. It can be a problem in natural areas as well as on nurseries, tree farms, and in the garden. Its rapid growth means that plants can very quickly shade out other plants with a dense blanket of twining vines, preventing them from photosynthesizing. And as it does this, it can kill small trees and shrubs, and infestations lead to significant reduction in the native plant diversity in an area. The species prefers sun and moist soils. So it is especially a threat to open habitats, wetlands, stream banks, disturbed areas like roadsides, and the forest edge. And you can see these pictures, it's just climbing all over the forest edge and these fields. So how to identify it? It's a really distinctive plant. There's not a whole lot that looks like it. Thankfully, if you find it, you're probably going to wonder, if you don't know about it already, what is this thing? It's got triangular leaves. It's got barbs all along its stem, petioles, and the leaf midvein beneath the leaf. Although its flowers aren't showy, it develops a really beautiful ornamental blue fruit in the fall, which you can see in this bottom picture. And all plants in the buckwheat family have these ochrea along the stem, which are essentially fused stipules. And this plant has really distinctive ones that are leafy and wide and round. Here's a better picture of those. You can see the ochrea here and also the beautiful blue fruit. As the fruit mature, they fall off the plant really easily. So you have to be careful when you're working around it, not to knock the fruit off into the ground. Another picture of a younger seedling, and you can see the barbs growing up the stem there. And even in winter, the dead vines, they remain all over the plants and are just covering them and really noticeable. Here's another image of the dead plant material. You can see the barbs along those petioles. So this plant originated in East Asia and India, where it's native, and it was first documented in the 1890s in Portland, Oregon, although it has not yet become established as an invader in the Western United States. It was first reported in the Eastern US in the 1930s in York County, Pennsylvania at Gable Nursery. And it's believed to have been brought in with other seeds that were sent to the nursery. And this is the plant's current distribution according to EDMAPS. Of course, this is reliant on reports of the species. So it is very likely that it is in other counties that aren't documented here. The shade of the green on this map represents the density of the reports for each county. So the darker the green, the more reports there are for the county. You can see that it is pretty widespread in the mid-Atlantic, which is where it first entered the country. But it also has outlier populations in Indiana and Iowa. And it was actually just first reported here in Kentucky this September, after we were already talking about discussing this plant at our conference. I think it was the same day. One of our staff from Kentucky Nature Preserves came across a posting on iNaturalist where a landowner had posted a picture of it to confirm the identification, and that's in Carter County, Kentucky. So you can sort of see that on the map, light green up there in northeastern Kentucky. So that landowner reported it and then communicated with folks from our staff and the Invasive Plant Council and UK. Ellen Crocker actually went out there to help remove the plants and the seeds to try to prevent further spread of the species. But it is now in this state, and it's likely in other locations, especially in northeastern Kentucky. So that's where we should start looking out for it. The seeds are dispersed by birds and other animals, including deer, squirrels. Apparently there are reports of some ants consuming the seeds and dispersing them. They're also dispersed, they can enter a new site with soil that is moved, or nursery plants. I have personally seen this happen in a landscape in New York City, um, where a new planting occurred, and then mile a minute was one of the weeds that was coming up all over the area. So it's good to keep an eye out in those new planting areas for that species. A lot of nursery plants come from the mid-Atlantic. And then it can also be moved on equipment between sites. So it's important to clean equipment before you move it, or between natural areas where you're working. And finally, not displayed here, but the fruit floats. So it can be dispersed along riparian corridors and in wetlands via water. As far as management goes, mechanical removal is a good option for small populations. Hand removal should be scheduled prior to seed set in late summer if possible. The barbs can be really painful. They catch on your skin when you're working around the plant. So gloves are important, long sleeves, just protection. But also, if you end up having to remove this at a later date, such as the case in that population with Carter County, it's important to be really careful, because if the seeds are already on that, they're falling off very easily, to try to collect those and dispose of them properly. Intermittent mowing can help reduce the biomass, and that tactic can be used in fields where the species has invaded, but because the plant grows so quickly, it's likely to continue to produce seed despite mowing. So just be aware of that. Conservation grazing has been used by some researchers in New York State as a management strategy for a mile a minute, and they have seen some really good success. I'll post the paper that was published about that at the end, but they saw that using sheep to manage this, the flowering was reduced significantly in grazed areas compared to ungrazed areas. And then also just mowing that plant down to allow sunlight to reach other species helped to increase the species richness in those areas. Plus, they're really cute. So who doesn't want some sheep on their natural area if you're able to take care of them? Chemical management is a good option for larger populations. A pre-emergent can be used successfully because this is an annual species. If it's applied before germination in the spring, of course, this is something that would be used on a site where the species has already infested. So you know that the seed bank is there to go into the area and treat it with a pre-emergent. In February or March, prior to germination, is a good option. Post-emergent selective chemicals, triclopyr, Garland 3A, or Vaseline, which is an aquatic approved chemical, can be used for foliar treatment of the species. And then if you're not concerned with harming desirable species in the area, you can use a non-selective, such as any of the formulations of glyphosate. And that treatment should occur prior to seed being set on the plant later in the summer. And then one last chemical that can be used is Plateau, and that is a combination of pre and post-emergent. So if you've already got some germination and you want to spray the leaves of those plants, but also prevent additional germination, that would be a good option. And then I just reiterate what everybody else has said. The label is the law. You always need to follow the label. Refer to that for application rates and PPE and mixing everything. The label is the law. There has also been some biological control developed for this species. A non-native Asian weevil was extensively studied and tested in the early 2000s out of University of Delaware. And that has actually been introduced in a number of locations around the mid-Atlantic, including on islands of the Ohio. River, and it does help to control and deter the species, but is best used in combination with other management practices. When we were finding this species in Pennsylvania, we would often find plants that had been that with the weevil present on them. So that has been a successful introduction, and they did study that extensively to find that it was a host-specific weevil. Other management strategies include planting and encouraging woody tree growth in known infested areas. Of course, you would still need to manage the mile a minute while you're waiting for those to grow and shade out the plants, limiting disturbance, monitoring newly planted landscapes for early invasions, and cleaning equipment between sites. Combined management strategies are always helpful and smart plan for managing invasive species. One combination could be using a pre-emergent in the spring and then following up with mechanical removal later in the season of any plants that did germinate. And I really like these types of management schedules. I can't take credit for this one, which was published by Penn State Extension, but just seeing when you can time your management based on the life cycle of the plant. And then finally, if you see something, say something. I know Ellen's going to talk about this a little bit more, but this is a really new species in the state of Kentucky, and it could be really destructive to our natural areas and managed landscapes. So if you notice it, even if it's not on your own property, it's on some natural area where you're hiking, take a picture, try to take information about where you are, where you've seen it. You can report your findings on EdMaps. You can alert the Kentucky Invasive Plant Council. We would definitely be interested in hearing about this one. And yeah, just keep an eye out for this. It's going to be a lot easier to manage earlier on than when it becomes established. Here are some references, papers that I looked at, and EdMaps, as well as Penn State Extension has some wonderful information about mile a minute. And thank you so much for having me on here, Ellen.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for all you're doing with the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, as well as on the board of the Kentucky Invasive Plant Council and helping to plan this conference. So if you have questions for Jess, please put those in the chat